Now to what the unions say is a landmark case that could affect the rights of hundreds of thousands of workers in London and beyond. It involves a group of staff who work at the University of London but are technically employed by an outsourcing firm. They are filing a legal challenge demanding to be allowed to negotiate their terms and conditions directly with the university. If they win, it would have implications for employers and workers across the capital, as Simon Harris now explains.
They might lack the muscle of Uber drivers and Deliveroo riders, but 75 security guards, porters and receptionists at the University of London have embarked on a fight which could affect millions of contract workers. They want the right to negotiate directly with the university, not with their employer, a company called Cordant.
We say the University of London is the de facto employer, and in legal terms we say the joint employer. It's the University of London and not Cordant who's deciding their pay and terms and conditions, and that's why they should be able to negotiate with the University of London.
Henry Chango Lopez gets up at 4 in the morning to do a cleaning job before clocking on at the university 4 hours later to work as a porter. Cordant pays him the London living wage of £10.20 an hour.
We have far worse terms and conditions than the direct employees. So I think we are very treated unfairly, like for instance sick pay, holidays and pensions. As an example, we have a 1% contribution pension from our employer, which is Cordant at the moment, whereas the direct employees would have a 13% on top of the wages for the pensions. So it's a massive difference.
Today, Mr. Chango Lopez and other members of the Cordant workforce went on strike. Their union is demanding recognition by the university and has submitted its case to an official arbitration panel.
Cordant declined our invitation to comment today, and the university wouldn't talk to us either. But it did release a statement to explain its position.
It said the university does not employ any of these workers and does not accept that the relevant legislation recognises the concept of joint employment. We have therefore not agreed to the IWGB's request for recognition. The union has recently been involved in the campaign by some Uber drivers, Deliveroo riders and other gig economy workers to be treated as employees, not self-employed. This latest challenge won't be straightforward.
Unfortunately, the law as it stands at the moment does suggest that they are able to negotiate with their employer. It's just the difficulty here is that their employer is their contractual employer as opposed to the place that they actually do carry out their day-to-day activities.
The university might win the contest in the courts, but the workers could still gain some concessions. The university has offered to review pay and conditions with its contractor, Cordant. Simon Harris, ITV News, Bloomsbury.
Good evening. The Chancellor had long been promising measures to help first-time buyers in his budget, but it was still a surprise when he announced he was abolishing stamp duty for most of those taking their first steps onto the housing ladder. On the face of it, a boost for Londoners already facing huge housing costs, but there is already concern tonight the move will actually result in higher demand and higher prices. The duty will be abolished on the first £300,000 on homes worth £500,000 or less. That will result in savings of up to £5,000. The Chancellor is also setting aside £44 billion for a nationwide house building programme. Away from housing, there was also a pledge to eliminate homelessness by 2027 and a £28 million package of support for survivors of the Grenfell fire. But it is a budget that is already coming under fire tonight, with London's mayor saying the measures designed to fix the capital's housing market could end up having the opposite effect. Our political correspondent Simon Harris has the details.
It is one of the biggest political challenges in London, how to solve the housing crisis. For some developers, the new mantra is build to rent. On this site in Silvertown, more than half the new homes will only be available to renters, not buyers.
What we would like is that the focus isn't purely on building homes for sale, and that there is an acceptance from the Chancellor that providing high quality, professionally managed homes for rent is equally as important.
But when the Chancellor announced his housing master plan in the budget, the focus was firmly on helping young voters become homeowners, not renters.
The dream of home ownership will become a reality in this country once again.
The big giveaway was on stamp duty.
For all first-time buyer purchases up to £300,000, I am abolishing stamp duty altogether.
And in high-value areas like London, there was an extra concession.
It will also be available on the first £300,000 of the purchase price of properties up to £500,000.
Very good, the former mayor of London could be heard saying, but this was not what Labour wanted to hear.
We need a large-scale, publicly funded house-building programme, not this government's accounting tricks and empty promises. Yes, we back the abolition of stamp duty for first-time buyers because it was another Labour policy in our manifesto in June, not a Tory one.
Theresa May has promised to make housing her personal priority. Last week she saw a council regeneration scheme at Barnet. The London boroughs had high hopes the Chancellor would lift the cap on borrowing to enable them to build thousands of new council homes. In the end, he didn't write a blank cheque, but said in areas of high demand, councils can apply for the cap to be raised.
Westminster is obviously one of those areas, so the devil is obviously in the detail, but I am fairly confident that we will see a very good deal for Westminster in the affordable housing agenda.
The Chancellor's promise to abolish stamp duty for first-time buyers is already under fire. The Office for Budget Responsibility said it could push up house prices.
The idea that this by itself will go anywhere near helping fix the housing crisis is ridiculous. What the government should have done was to announce a significant sum of money to build affordable homes in London, allowing councils, housing associations and others to build the homes we desperately need.
That desperate need amounts to more than 60,000 new homes every year. Fewer than half that number are currently being built. Will the budget make a difference? Opinion is divided. Simon Harris, ITV News.
Well, our political correspondent Simon Harris is back in the studio now. Reality here, it looks good on paper, but when you unpick this budget, what does it mean for Londoners? Is it good? Is it bad?
Well, I'm sure a lot of first-time buyers will be delighted at being given a helping hand with the stamp duty cut. When it comes to building more council houses, I think the jury's out on whether the London boroughs will be given enough freedom to raise the money they want to. But as far as London's mayor is concerned, there is no question this is the most anti-London budget in a generation. Then, of course, Sadiq Khan did have quite an extensive and expensive shopping list. He wanted more money for housing. He wanted money to fund a diesel scrappage scheme to lessen the pain of his ultra-low emission zone. And he especially wanted more money for the police. He says as a result of not getting that, he now has to abandon his target of 32,000 police officers in London. But the budget was welcomed by Kensington and Chelsea, which is getting £28 million in the wake of Grenfell Tower to pay for mental health counselling and regeneration and a new community space in North Kensington. Kensington, of course, is high on the list of Labour targets for next year's borough elections.
All right, Simon, thank you. To anyone involved, it was obvious that huge resources were needed immediately to cope with the aftermath of the Grenfell Tower fire. But in the days that followed it, the response was painfully slow. And today, we've had an insight as to why. Senior officials from an emergency response team have been explaining why it took them 3 days to step in and offer help to an overwhelmed council. Our political correspondent Simon Harris has more.
But for the volunteers, an already devastating tragedy would have been even worse. As the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea struggled to cope with the Grenfell Tower disaster, an army of Good Samaritans came to the rescue. Hanan Mizu joined the community effort, helping to sort clothes and food, collecting names and trying to reunite separated families.
We waited for the government just to come in and just help in the early days, and that just didn't come. So we just thought that we have to just join collectively as a community and do what we can.
2.5 days after the tragedy, anger and frustration at the council's failings erupted at a public meeting. Kensington and Chelsea was eventually relieved of its duties by an emergency response team made up of chief executives from other London boroughs. But it took the London Resilience Group, also known as the Gold Group, 3 days, and today members of the London Assembly wanted to know why.
I don't understand how the scale or the complexity, whichever word you used, was not perceived almost immediately.
What happened here was we began to understand as outsiders the impact on that community over the first 72 hours. And it became very evident it was far more complex, far more impacting on that community than at first sight from outside.
Even though Kensington and Chelsea's inability to cope was plain for all to see, the Gold Group had no power to intervene until invited to by the council.
I wouldn't want the committee to have the impression that we were just sort of like having a watching brief and sitting on our hands and waiting to see what happened. It's a fact that there is nothing in the resolution that allows us to step in or allows us to impose intervention.
The Assembly was told that in future the response would be swifter.
The reality of the learning and the training and the issues that we've had to deal with, particularly around the complexity of Grenfell, is the realisation quicker, as part of where we are just now.
Grenfell has changed the landscape in many ways. Tried and tested procedures for dealing with a major disaster in London were found to be inadequate. Simon Harris, ITV News, North Kensington.
Well, our correspondent Simon Harris is on nearby Regent Street for us now, just by the police cordon. The tube stations have now reopened in the last few minutes. But Simon, what is the latest down there?
Well, what was plainly and very, very evidently to many, many people a major terrorist alert here in central London in the West End on this, the busiest shopping day in the run-up to Christmas, does appear to be winding down. I say does appear to be. We haven't seen for certain that these stations are open, although I'm told that passengers can now change between trains at Oxford Circus. But I'm standing on Regent Street just north of Oxford Circus, and as you see, there's still a police cordon in place. Regent Street and Oxford Street themselves are still sealed off. But we understand that people who were told to stay inside shops are now being told over loudspeakers that it is safe to come out. We have seen people start to emerge along the pavements. It does appear that whatever the police feared was happening here hasn't turned out. The most important thing, of course, is that police statement that we heard earlier from Ruth Zorko, that no, they have not located any trace of suspects, no evidence of shots fired or casualties. At the moment, there is still a police helicopter overhead here over the West End. It is not surprising that the reaction of the police was, as we saw this afternoon, we are on a heightened state of terror alert. This is a very busy day in a very busy part of the capital, and when something like this happens, it was inevitable that the police would respond in this way. But it does seem at the moment that things are winding down.
All right, Simon, for now, thank you. Well, back to our top story tonight and that incident at Oxford Circus this evening. Our correspondent Simon Harris is still at the scene. Simon, the police operation appears to have been stood down in the last few minutes. So what's happening now?
Well, Lucretia, this is the scene at Oxford Circus Underground Station right now, and it could be any other Friday night in the run-up to Christmas. The pavements are packed with shoppers and commuters. The tube station is open, as is Bond Street, which was closed earlier. It's hard to think that just 20 minutes ago this was at the centre of a cordoned-off area and what appeared to be a major anti-terrorist operation by the police. It started at about 20 to 5 when there were reports received by the police of shots being fired on Oxford Street or on Oxford Circus Underground Station. Armed police from the Met responded along with British Transport Police. Immediately the area was cordoned off and people in the street were told to get inside shops. We heard one report of a lady who was in a shoe shop where she said there was a stampede, shells went flying, people were trampled on, and she's one of 30 people locked in a storeroom inside the shoe shop. The reports of people running and shouting, screaming down Oxford Street, a large stampede. But there was a large police search which took place once the area was cordoned off, and the key point is that there is no evidence of shots being fired and no sign of any casualties. The police have stood this down.
All right, Simon Harris, many thanks.